today. Whoa, what was that?
We call to order the June 22nd meeting of the New Ulm Human Rights Commission. Call to order. We have a quorum. A couple of caveats, since we have 4 of us here in the chamber and a number of us online in the Zoom meeting. Just a couple of reminders. If you are on the Zoom end, we will, if you could mute your mic on the other end until you want to speak. That helps us get some background noise out of the way. 2, all votes must be by roll call. So I will call your name for you to vote either aye, for or against the motion. So we'll do it that way, and then you'll have to unmute your mic at that point as well. If you have a question, don't be afraid to jump in. Unmute yourself and jump in if you want to comment on that. I trust you all have the agenda before us. We will have a guest speaker today. We asked Chief of Police Dave Borchert to come in and talk about training techniques for restraints and what goes on in police departments across the state and country, I guess. I just want to point out that in the past, Chief Borchert has appeared in informational capacity for us, sharing information, seeking advice from us on the body cam issue, as well as some of the early alert systems that the police department was investigating at the time, and has always kept us in on the loop. When the whole George Floyd episode took place, I felt it was probably a good idea to have Chief Borchert come in and just talk to us a little bit so that we're more knowledgeable, so we're not speaking with forked tongues with anybody as far as keeping our information straight. So we'll turn the microphone over to Chief Borchert, if we will.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. Again, name is Dave Borchert. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of New Ulm. I'm also the Emergency Management Director for the city. And, I'm proud to serve as a peace officer. It's kind of a rough time right now, but I'm still very proud to serve. Been licensed since 1993, so my peace officer's license started my first job in law enforcement was in 1993. This is the 3rd department that I've served with, and I've been the Chief of Police since November of 2018. So I just thought I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak and maybe, answer a few questions if I can. I have to, make sure that I'm speaking within my pay grade, I guess. I don't work for other departments or anything like that, but I'm a licensed peace officer, and hopefully, I think, one of the, bottom line, some of the underlying questions sometimes is like, could something like this happen here? I certainly hope not. Homicides can happen anywhere, but I certainly hope not. As far as covering in kind of in a logical manner, when I say a licensed peace officer, I'm talking about, who licenses us. The state of Minnesota licenses all peace officers. And the post board is the board that essentially is responsible for that. And the post board stands for Peace Officers Standard and Training Board. So ultimately, if they revoke our license, and that even, like when we talk about every licensed officer, whether that's a state patrol officer, state trooper, or if it's a county deputy, if it's city of Minneapolis, city of New Ulm, we all have identical peace officer's license with a different number attached to it. Mine is 11992. That license number stays with me from the very first day that I was employed to the very end. That's unique to me, and that stays with me the entire time. And that's true with every peace officer in the state of Minnesota. So I was essentially when they started the licensing many years ago, the 11,992nd person to receive a peace officer's license in the state of Minnesota. So, and then it goes in consecutive order like that. So they're responsible for all licensing of peace officers. They're also responsible to make sure that we're receiving the mandatory training that we're required to have on a regular basis, and then that we're complying with their directives. So, couple things that I think are important that are required for all licensed officers is that when they first get hired by a department, that there's a psychological evaluation that every officer has to submit to. And then in addition to that, there's a thorough background investigation done for all officers. So, you know, if there's certainly any felony, any misdemeanor, they can even get at juvenile records, because sometimes they're even saying, you know, is that really necessary? But they feel it is for law enforcement, and they're allowed, you know, even going outside of what labor law normally allows for, we can get into juvenile records. In fact, we have to check juvenile records. That's part of the background investigation. So that's kind of the background with post board. Some questions came up as far as the policy. You know, does the city of New Ulm's policy allow for chokeholds? No, it never has since I've been here. Now, going back in time, I don't know, some of you may have had the opportunity to see that one article that was in the Min Post. They had interviewed me and they'd asked about, you know, chokeholds. I was very surprised, and they had talked to different departments. It's just, I was in the Free Press on that. The Mankato Free Press picked up in the story, and so did the Journal. But again, the initial people that did that was a reporter out of Min Post, which I believe is out of the Twin Cities. They had asked about chokeholds. I was very surprised that Minneapolis still had chokeholds. You know, again, I don't work for Minneapolis. I'm just saying that I was very surprised, because I go back far enough in time where I was taught chokeholds. And even when we were taught them back in, you know, the early 90s, they had said, here's something that you're probably never going to use. But they had showed us how to apply one. And a chokehold is basically with minimal pressure, and if it's probably put on properly, there's a lot of control that you can have, because you're restricting people's airflow. I mean, it doesn't seem real humane, because that's the reason it's basically been outlawed. The other thing is, it's very difficult to put on, because if you misapply it very easily, you can imagine when you're rolling around with someone, you're basically in combat, you're wrestling. If it gets on put on improperly, it goes over the windpipe. And they've had a lot of problems, like over the Adam's apple, where they crush it. So it was designed to go on lower than that. It's how I was taught. If you think back, this might date me a little bit, but if you think of like the American Wrestling Association back in the day, if you think of the sleeper, that's what it was. It was the sleeper. That was a common wrestling move, and that was something that, you know, earlier law enforcement was taught. Now, like I said, I've never been at a department that policy allowed us to use the chokehold. We've never trained on that. In fact, our training is very specific. We even address that during annual trainings, that we don't do chokeholds. So it's very clear on that. To get a little bit more into training, not to jump ahead of myself, there's 3 primary trainings that peace officers take in the state of Minnesota. There's mandatory annual training that we take, and that's exactly what it is. Every year we're required to take it, and they go back in time. So if they're auditing our books, and they audit our books every so often, generally every 3 years, but they can do a surprise audit. They can do an audit. They, meaning the BC or the Post Board, can do an audit on us whenever they want to. So we have the training records, we have everything to support it. But there's 3 primary. There's mandatory annual training. There's mandatory crisis, conflict, and community diversity training, which is something relatively new. That goes by the licensing cycle of every 3 years. So again, have to show that we have 16 hours of training every 3 years for that. And then there's mandatory OSHA training that we have to take. In addition to that, there's one other, I guess maybe an exception to the rule. There's mandatory emergency vehicle operation course. So basically, if we're doing high-speed chases, things like that, and that's every 5 years that we have to take that. So I have to, as the chief law enforcement officer, when I get audited, or if I get a surprise audit, or if they They just want to check if I'm in compliance. Essentially, I have to show that every one of my peace officers that works for my department is within compliance for that. If they're not, it actually, Minnesota's, I believe, the only state that, and I know from a licensing standpoint, law enforcement's the only one where they can actually come after the chief law enforcement officer. So I am responsible. If they ask, within your department, who's responsible? Is the officers responsible? Well, kinda. They're responsible to make sure that they're in compliance, otherwise they can't have a peace officer's license. But ultimately, they can actually come after me. So if I'm not providing the training, if I'm not making sure that they have the training, I'm ultimately responsible. So I could get my own peace officer's license suspended or even revoked if I'm not complying with these directives. So this post board has quite a bit of leverage there because, no matter what position you have, you can be the elected sheriff, for example, and they're elected by the people. However, if they don't have a peace officer's license, they can't be sheriff. So at the end of the day, the post board does have quite a bit of leverage on the officers, and they should. I mean, they ultimately, someone has to, from a licensing standpoint, and that's the agency that's responsible for that. Again, you can't work in law enforcement without a peace officer's license in the state of Minnesota. So when they say licensed peace officer, licensed police officer, licensed law enforcement officer, those are kind of used, those are exchangeable phrases, but that means that I'm licensed by the state of Minnesota, by the post board. Okay, so as far as mandatory annual training that we have, again, this is required every year, every calendar year. It's use of deadly force, and it's the use of legal issues connected with deadly force and use of force readiness aspects regarding that. But basically, that would be the classroom version. When I say use of force, if you say to any peace officer, they're thinking, okay, that's the classroom version. And that's where the state statute that governs that is 609.06. And that's where every officer every year gets trained on it. And ultimately, most of us have to take some type of a test. That's the format we use. In addition, we have to have defensive tactics training. So defensive tactics is the hands-on. That's the one where every year I get to, hopefully I've worked out a little bit beforehand. Otherwise, the next day or next week I'm going to be really sore because you're kind of rolling around with people half your age. But that's where we're putting the holds into place, making sure that we're comfortable doing them. Because there's certain things, certain techniques that we use that with minimal force we can gain compliance. And again, that's not a chokehold. It's pressure points and things like that we use. And that's the training that we put that into place. Even like refreshing that we don't use chokeholds, that we're going over handcuffing. Handcuffing we consider part of our force continuum. It's a handcuff, but it's still part of, it's a use of force. That's how we train. So that's a defensive tactic. And again, that every single year we're responsible to make sure that the officers have that. So that's annual by calendar year. Other things that just recently came into place, it's the mandatory crisis conflict community diversity training. So it's basically the two areas that Post Board is looking at is mental health and implicit bias. That's the two areas, and it's 16 hours every 3 years. So every licensing cycle, our peace officer's license lasts for 3 years. So realistically, I suppose I could do it 16 hours the first year and then forget about it, or the third year, and then I wouldn't have to have any others. It's the licensing cycle. What we take now, I can require, as a law enforcement agency, as the CLAO we refer to as the head person, I can require more training. I can't allow them to have less, but I can require more training. If I have less than that, that would have to be, I'd have to report that that person's no longer working. And so, for example, if I had someone that is in the National Guard and got activated, during that licensing cycle, they're not working for me or for that period of time, so they probably didn't take defensive tactics because they might be in Afghanistan or Iraq or something. But again, I report that. to the post board, and then when that person comes back, then we reactivate everything, and then I make sure that they're within compliance. So the mandatory training that we take in the city of New Ulm is we take 12 hours basically by patrol classes. Patrol is through the League of Minnesota Cities. And it's just it's very good training. It's very cost effective. It's certainly well within the compliance. The officers, when they take it, and I'd have to show it to you, but very, very good quality. When they're taking it, they can like pause it because I just got a call. I have to run out because ambulance call or something like that. But literally when I come back, I can start right back up on my computer and keep rolling through that. So we realistically, we take, when it's all said and done, we have a little over triple the required training for that licensing cycle is what it figures out to, because we have some other training that we take in addition to that. So just to kind of read them off, we take procedural justice and police legitimacy, and that's under the mandatory crisis, conflict, and community diversity training that's required. We do what's called 72-hour holds. So that's like when we're taking someone in for like a mental health hold. That's a good example. There's other examples, even like if we take someone to detox, technically it falls under that 72-hour hold. Then we take implicit bias, part 1 and part 2. So we take 2 hours of implicit bias. And then as far as the mental health, we take, and this is just by patrol, this is the online training. We take the introduction course, which is an hour, kind of explains everything that's kind of expected of us. Then part 2 is assessment, part 3 is intervention, and then part 4 is like a capstone, just an overview. Each one of those courses are 1 hour. And then there's tests that go along with that. And in addition, I'm proud of this, is long before any of this, I have certified instructors with, it's called Barbara Schneider. If you ever look up Barbara Schneider, basically she had gotten some mental health, there were some mental health issues, and she basically got, it was in Minneapolis, and she got killed with law enforcement. It was just a bad set of circumstances, something that, they believe could have been avoided, and they set up the Barbara Schneider Foundation to basically, it's correctional officers as well, but primarily law enforcement, to train them in de-escalation and recognizing mental health issues and ways of de-escalating those situations. We're not diagnosing as a medical provider, but we have to have, basic knowledge of it to be able to respond properly in the field. So we have 3 instructors, actually 4, including our community-based coordinator that I'll talk about a little bit later, but we have in-house instructors. So we actually sent them to all the training up there at Barbara Schneider up in St. Paul, and they came back with instructor certification, and they actually instruct us. So it's meant for that we have classroom and we have practical training every year. And and the thought behind that, when I became chief, that was one of my priorities, was mental health and de-escalation. And what this is meant for, we've even worked with like local people as far as trying to find actors. That's where we've really struggled with it. The classroom is pretty straightforward. We just provide the classroom training for every single officer. And we usually do it in two different blocks of 2 hours. But again, 4 hours of training and then 4 hours of practical. We have had problems with COVID. We had to suspend it because certainly the interaction. We'd like to get this going again in fall. And then we've also had a hard time. We've struggled a little bit. In fact, I think I reached out, I know, to some members here trying to find actors, because some people, they understand mental health, but they just don't want to necessarily act, be the actor. And then, vice versa. Some people can act, but they're not really giving us the right signs and stuff like that. So we've actually worked with psychologists, local psychologists with that, to have practical training. And what I'd like to do, what our goal is that we have an incident that happened that we can learn from. Like, let's say it happened in the field, and it's just like, okay, wish that would have gone differently, or maybe could have gone differently, that we learn from it and that we actually put it into practice later on, and have everybody have the opportunity of learning from it. I've been through Barbara Schneider certainly as well, long before this. And sometimes it's kind of tough training because it's like, okay, when we're out up in front, we have the instructors going, no, that should have been done differently, or that could have been done differently. Why don't you try this approach? So it's been very good training. Like I said, I'm proud of that because in the state of Minnesota, besides some metro areas, we're about one of the only rural areas that actually provide this. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And I think it's important for serving the community that all of us are sworn to protect. Now, in addition to that, we have mandatory OSHA training that we have to take every year. Now, that's probably not as, for this discussion, but I mean, again, we take the OSHA training, so that's more like aware, employee right to know training, bloodborne pathogen, hazardous material awareness, hearing protection, personal protective equipment, PPE, portable fire extinguishers, and then respiratory protection for law enforcement. So that's OSHA. Now, the Post Board probably, we get Post credit for it, but the Peace Officer Standard and Training Board could probably care less about the OSHA training. So it just it's not in their wheelhouse. But OSHA's really, interested in it. So we have that. We have that as mandatory training as well. And then the last one is a mandatory emergency vehicle operation course, Evoc. So that's every 5 years that we have to take 8 hours of training, and that's where we do it up in St. Cloud because there's only certain, instructors certified to have that, and to have our own in-house instructor, it just wouldn't be cost effective. So we always go up to St. Cloud for that. Very good training. Again, mandatory every 5 years. We do ours every 3-year licensing cycle, just so that we're ahead of the curve. For some reason, someone's on a deployment or something happens off because of FMLA, we can get them within that 3-year period. It just gives us a little bit of breathing room because they're pretty hard and fast as far as the 5-year. Plus, if you're driving vehicles, over 100 miles an hour or something like that, I think it's, far serving the community that we have awareness and training on that on a regular basis. And that, again, that's very good training. What I found from that, when we're actually going through that, they'll say, okay, hot shots, here's your opportunity. You can drive that squad car as fast as you want. This light turns red means right, yellow means left. It only goes off, it's like time delayed, so you only have so many seconds. So the faster you go, the more likely you're going to fail at that because the human body, you can only process it so fast. But it's an opportunity. We go on a skid path. And again, with that controlled circumstance, we can drive as fast as we want. But it's kind of amazing. People are pretty cautious because they want to pass. And they want to, you can't beat the clock is really what it comes down to. And it just really shows like our reflexes. The human body can only process it so fast. And it's good quality training. In addition, what I wanted to kind of touch on is what we're offering here, and that's kind of unique to this area, is we have a community-based coordinator that works with us. So she's actually a social worker that works for Brown County. And when they started the program, it was for de-escalation. It was to work with like law enforcement, to teach some of that stuff. She's one of her name is Emily Schneider. She's one of our instructors for Barbara Schneider. She went and got certified as well. She has a master's degree in psychology and again, social worker, also works with adult mental health. So again, very, very good qualifications. We're one of like 4 counties in this area that provide it. And my understanding is we're the only ones in rural Minnesota besides those 4 counties that provide a community-based coordinator. It's not exactly what we initially maybe, when you start with something, kind of what you picture doesn't maybe quite turn out that way. We really wanted the person embedded that they're working with law enforcement all the time, helping with de-escalation. And again, you understand that they're working 40 hours a week. They're not going to stretch, but we're hoping that we could build on that to have basically 24/7. That didn't quite turn out that way, is what I can share. Maybe a little bit of it's tied to funding as well, but again, I think we're very fortunate to have that position, and I believe the community and our local law enforcement has benefited from that.
Let's pause here. Does anybody have any questions for Dave at this point? Okay, anything to add, Dave?
Yeah, I do. When we talked about, when we're talking about the homicide that happened up in Minneapolis with George Floyd, I'm very confident. I know I'm in a public meeting here, but that's not a training issue. That was a homicide. And when we talk about preventive measures, I mean, I think it may be a bold statement, but when we talk about training and policy, I don't think I'm confident that wasn't going to correct it. That was just simply homicide. There's inexcusable. There's no way you can certainly justify that in any shape, way, or form. Here's some reforms, and again, these reforms, they go as far as, things that are being suggested. I think all of you are probably as familiar with this as I am, that right now, legislators went home. They just weren't able to finish. So nothing got resolved or finished. I know that Governor Walz was disappointed because some of these things, I have the spotlights on Minnesota and kind of wanted these things moving ahead. But here's some things that I believe, just to organize my thoughts, and things that are being suggested. So officer misconduct is obviously serious. So we talked about they talked about some of these individuals after the fact. They said, individual had multiple citations, multiple things in the personnel file. How could this person still be serving? I don't know. I don't work for that department, and I'm not trying to pass the buck. I don't know that, because there was some serious, that wasn't the first time they're involved in a fatal situation like that. And again, some things are justified, but I don't know, because there was discipline action taken against this officer. Actually, a couple of the officers, 2 of them were brand new, but 2 of them were experienced officers that you kind of look at that, and I believe me, people have been asking, people that I was really surprised by, and I don't take it as an attack. I'm taking it as civil discussion. I really am. Yeah. But they've been asking me those hard questions, and I don't have an answer for that. I don't know why that person was still working in that capacity.
Well, I think just to make a note for everybody, in our packets there is a list of some of the reforms that the police. Let's see, what's the
Post board?
The post board's is listed in here, but
Department
it's
of Public Safety?
Yeah, it's the POCI caucus, the police reform bills that they were trying to get in front of the legislature.
Here's some things on. I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna move through these relatively fast. Okay, so as far as officer misconduct for serious offenses, now we're talking about serious offenses, not wearing the wrong color rain jacket or something, but literally, but serious offenses. So some reforms that are being suggested is that they're handled with the state of Minnesota. So basically, it's not within each department. Like ultimately, literally, it goes in front of some civilian review committee, and they're essentially the judge and jury on that. And again, we're not talking about criminal, we're talking about administrative things, like maybe just, use of force, maybe could have handled things differently, but I think that's serious, and that would go in front of that review board. Having an outside agency or internal investigation is required to be done by the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, the state law enforcement agency. So right now, if I have something that happens with one of my officers, that gets referred to, I have to select an agency that'll do the internal investigation. Now, we don't have internal investigators. There's not a lot of them that have been trained with internal investigations. That's kind of a unique skill. And in small agencies, we don't have IA departments. I mean, we rely on our partners. I've been trained in it, but it's called a garrity warning. There's certain procedures from labor law that we have to comply with in law enforcement. Otherwise, we could potentially jeopardize a criminal investigation and things like that. So we're somewhat limited on that. We don't have a whole lot of options. Now, this was Minneapolis. That's a big agency, but I think all internal investigations, reasonably speaking, should be done by the state of Minnesota, the BCA. Also, having the Attorney General serve as the prosecutor for criminal violations with an officer that's in the line of duty. So in situations like that, and I think that's part of that proposal. And again, these aren't necessarily my thoughts. These are just things that are being brought up for discussion. Having Peace Officer Standard and Training Board lead internal and outside agency investigations, they would be responsible for license discipline issues. So that's still currently the case. But you kind of wonder about the database, because sometimes they don't know that the officer maybe was accused of something in another department, and they might not be compelled to share it, where ultimately that would be one agency taking care of that. Then another thing that's being brought up is that post board would have more civilian oversight members on the board. So it's not just, attorneys from the state and stuff like that. They'd actually have civilians on there. And then, again, training. This wasn't a training issue, but it's, I think training is good.
More training, yeah.
And then post board would also do internal investigations on new hires, because that's a really good opportunity. We're hiring 2 officers now. So when I have to do an internal investigation, or I have to do a background investigation on these people. But again, our definition on that, our interpretation of what's acceptable will vary a little bit from agency to agency, where I think, if the post board literally would do that, or the BCA would be responsible for that, ultimately the post board would say these people are eligible. They're licensed, they're eligible. That means they passed the background investigation. If we want to go into something unique to our community, like, we'd like you to live within, or, those type of things. We want to know how much investigative skills you have. I mean, that would be an outside discussion, but I think that would really have value. And then having the post board oversee background investigations. And then as far as the eligibility. So again, either kind of pass or fail. Either they pass that or not at this time. Maybe it's something they can work on, but I think that would be a lot of the issues here. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I think that was, how do you prevent the homicide? I don't know, but you kind of, if they would have had some type of a status like that, some type of a form like that, I think it would have been beneficial for all of us. So that really concludes my comments.
I have 2 quick questions, Dave.
Sure.
One, does New Ulm have a civilian review board?
We do.
Okay.
Police commission.
Okay.
There's 3 of them. It's the mayor and 2 other police commissioners, and they're selected.
2 other police commissioners?
Yes, there's 3 police commissioners.
Civilians?
Yes.
Okay, not commissioners from other
Nope,
communities?
nope.
Okay.
They're civilians. So like you're a commissioner, human rights commissioner. They're
Right.
police
Okay.
commissioners. It's the same
And
process. The
when
mayor
you-
selects them.
When you discipline an officer, are they eligible for arbitration?
Yes.
Okay, and who does the arbitration? The police commission?
Yes.
Okay.
The police commission's role as the review, that's a very good question, is they're responsible for police officers' eligibility.
Okay.
So like the qualifications. So like when we go through this, hiring these new officers, they're part of the interview panel. They're the final interview panel.
Okay.
So they have a vote on it. If we have something that goes through arbitration, it gets presented. If some officer grieves something, it goes in front of the police commission.
Other questions from anybody else on the Zoom?
I have a question.
Jackie?
This is Jackie.
Yep.
Back to the homicide. If we leave the main officer, Mr. Chauvin, in his position where he was at, and the other 3 officers, if we would switch out those 3 officers with 3 New Ulm Police Department officers, what would you have expected them to do to de-escalate the position? What could those other officers, the 3 that were actually there, what could they have done? Could they have pulled that officer off?
Yes.
I guess where my confusion comes in is there were 3 people there that I feel could maybe have stepped in, or did they not feel like they could? What are the steps there? What would you have expected your officers to do differently?
That's a very good question, very fair question. I would have expected them to intervene. I mean, they're having a homicide taking place in front of them. Again, and I'm not going to be judge and jury up there. I'm just talking, the question was what would happen in New Ulm? I would expect them to intervene. Does that answer your question? Like literally,
Yes.
physically, like if we're at a domestic assault or any assault, if we had some civilian doing that to someone else, the exact same process. You pull the person off, you physically restrain them, you intervene.
Okay. Other
Thank you.
questions?
Hi, everyone. Chief, this is Dan Kalk. Thanks for being here. I have a quick question on it's actually probably not that quick, but on June 2nd, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights filed suit against the Minneapolis Police Department. And already, I think on June 9th, they had essentially a court order with basically mandatory changes which needed to be made. First on top of the list was no more chokeholds. Obviously, New Ulm, you said, doesn't implement or even use that. But there was some other types of changes that they felt they should make. And kind of going to Jackie's point, it was duty, or I should say rather, the officers have a duty now if they are essentially witnessing excessive use of force regardless of rank. So my question is, I think that at least as of right now, is unique just to Minneapolis. But if that's something that passes, is that something that New Ulm could adopt, or would the post board adopt that, or how exactly would that work, and how do you see like New Ulm kind of adapting similar types of changes and reforms?
Again, that's a good question. I think that's a fair question, and I'm glad you brought it up. I'm not exactly sure what format they're going to use. My guess is it's going to be post required, that we're going to have to demonstrate that we have a policy on it, that every officer's required to review on a regular basis. Normally we always use annually, but again, we could say quarterly, but on a regular basis, that they're very familiar with that. So if it could be Dave Borkert as the chief of police loses his temper or something happens, and that the brand new police officers feels comfortable doing their job that they're sworn to do and intervene because, for example, regardless of rank, we have to follow the law. So, and I think to reinforce that that's drilled into everybody's head. And again, when I say that this is not a training issue or even a policy issue, I'm convinced of that. I feel strongly about that. If we go way back to how I was trained, Rodney King, that issue that happened, way back in the day, that was before I was a peace officer. And I mean, I can remember we train like that since then, that we have one person, basically it's supposed to be the most senior, but it kind of depends, but that one person's acting as the referee. Essentially just saying, whoa, 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 hold it. Because when they're in the middle of combat, in the middle of fight, if you've ever been in a wrestling match, even if you're well trained, you're trying to win. And where that one person is just saying, okay, that's enough now, pulling them back. Normally, again, it's usually more comfortable if that's the supervisor doing that. But Commissioner Kalk, your statement is well taken. Policy should dictate that it can be anybody doing that, and we should train on it. And again, I'm very confident that's going to be simply policy that all of us are going to have to adopt. I'm confident of that.
One quick question. I've seen like a lot of the cities' police departments have banned using, what do you want to call it, warrior training? How do you feel about that?
Could you describe warrior training so we're talking about the same thing?
It was in that memo.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to.
Well, it's just
Just
your
expand. Just a quick summary.
It's your basic like MMA style, I want to say. Wrestling, a lot of chokeholds, a lot of arm bars, a lot of it's your close combat.
Interactions with a citizen as a threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all citizens are looked at as as a threat, and you're the warrior. You're there. Everything's combat, no matter who it is.
But it's
So
not
then
just-
everybody you approach
It's-
is
yeah.
a potential
Hand-to-hand
threat
combat.
to you,
We're not
instead
saying
of
just police
approaching
officers, but-
said person as it being, a community as a peace officer. It, from what I have seen on it, it puts an officer on edge from day one, that they're out there fighting a war that isn't there. And I think it could actually, kind of push them one way or another with that type of training, instead of it being specifically for helping their community.
And I'm glad that you kind of differentiated. Okay, so when I think of warrior training, and it's like basically a very common one, and I've even been to it up in the cities. It basically was, when we talked about the Castile thing several years ago, that officer both of those officers had just been to some of that warrior training earlier, and it was that, like, I want to say within 6 months, and it's basically where it almost builds up. The argument against it is that it makes people paranoid. It makes officers paranoid that absolutely everybody in every situation, you've got to plan that this person is there to destroy you. And again, that was a very common training, and I've been to it a couple of times years ago. I haven't been to it anything recently, and we haven't sent our officers for several years. But now, when we talk about like hand-to-hand combat, that's a little bit of it's the nature of the business. I mean, when we're in close proximity to someone, if you come close to me, you grab my gun, it's got to be hand-to-hand combat, because I don't have many options. So, but to differentiate, it doesn't mean that everybody's grabbing my gun. I mean, that's where the officers, there's things that we can do. We can have security holsters. We can, and there's things that we do and that have worked fairly well. But to answer your question, Commissioner, we don't go to warrior training. And again, that's my interpretation, is the caliber press. That was a very common one. That's I think that's still being provided, but I don't see it in Minnesota a whole lot. But that's still, caliber press would be one example of that warrior training.
I think we have to move on to other items of business. Thank you, Chief
Thank
Borchert,
you.
once again,
All right.
for
thanks.
coming in and keeping us informed. Thank you. Okay, on to the next item of business, the approval of our minutes from the June 3rd, 2020 special meeting, which were included as part of the packet. Do I have a motion to accept?
This is Jackie Crable, and I move to accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Chad seconds that. Okay, all in favor? I'll do the start online. Diane?
Aye, yes.
Jackie?
Aye.
Dan? Tim?
Aye.
Deanna?
Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay. I read your lips.
You could read my lips, so yeah, I could tell.
Aye.
Wendy?
Aye.
Chad?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, next item of business, our budget report. Review it. If you take a quick look at it, if you'll notice that we have nothing to spend so far. Lisa did inform me that she did get the bill for the posters and in the process of is part of processing that, but it didn't show up on our report as of yet. So I think that's by information. Dan, I don't recall. We don't have to accept that or do anything with that, do we?
No, we approved it already.
Right. We approved the budget, I meant. It's just a report. Connected with that is the budget request for 2021. I think that's part of the packet. We have to submit that to the city council. And if I remember correctly, 8750 has been the number that we've used both in the last 2 years. This year we're a little under that because of not being able to participate in a number of COVID-related cancellations. Do we have any comments or suggestions as to recommendations for our 2021 budget?
Do we know if the city is kind of giving a leeway on that due to it being COVID, or if, because, before, if we don't use it, we can't, advocate for the same or more next year. Are they going to give us any leeway on that?
The only information I have is the letter from the city council, which says, due to the current economic impact to the city, your request will be considered as monies are available. That's the only limitation.
Yeah.
I would assume they would acknowledge the fact that we weren't able to use our budget because of cancellations due to COVID. So,
I'd stick with the same budget as last year then.
Okay, we don't make that a motion.
I'm of the same opinion. I think we just submit it as the same. Obviously, the unspoken asterisk is everything that's happened. So if they're wondering why there's so much left over, I don't think that they'll have to wonder for long. So I think we just submit it the same and just proceed. If we get 25% of it, then we do, but at least we ask for it.
How long do we have to spend for this budget? Like, when is this budget over? Because we still have time, right?
Yeah, I think it's in the June.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
No, it's until the end of the year.
Is it end of the year?
We get it in February.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we can still spend, so challenge accepted.
Okay. Can I have that as a motion?
I move to accept the 2021 budget.
That's Jackie.
Tim Frenning, second.
Who seconded
Okay.
that?
Everyone.
Tim and Diane.
Tim, okay.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All those in favor of resubmitting the same amount, $87.50 for our 2021 budget, vote aye. Diane?
Aye.
Jackie?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
Dan?
Aye.
Chad?
Aye.
Wendy?
Aye.
Aye.
Deanna?
Deanna, aye.
Okay, did I forget anybody? Motion passes. Okay.
Do you have to do yourself on those? Because you didn't really technically vote.
We need a
right?
gavel. Knock, knock. Thank you.
The don't I break ties?
Sure.
Chairman doesn't vote.
Okay.
Generally, okay. All right. Next is the events committee report. The Human Rights Award we tabled from last time, our special meeting. To think about that, I don't know if we have any more information. Looks like we're probably headed for a fall award ceremony of some kind, but we should probably think about a contingency plan for a fall awards ceremony in our next meeting. Is that agreeable with everyone?
Yes.
So could I direct the Human Rights Events Committee to propose a socially distanced awards ceremony?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So for sometime in the fall? Okay, good. We'll move on. The Education Committee report. I checked with Lisa. We had one essay, 2 posters handed in to her, and Wendy has one.
One poster.
One poster. Wendy and I chatted before. We're at a loss here, folks. We're at a loss as to what to do. It's certainly unprecedented. Perhaps we can get any ideas out there?
We only have 4 entries total.
Total.
Well, the school's shut down right when our
School's
deadline
shut
was.
down, yes.
So there could be some
that's
sitting
right.
at the school. We don't know. But do we honor the people who have turned theirs in? I mean, I don't know what the right
How
thing to do
about-
is because we said we're doing this contest.
What about the library? The library, do they still have things going on for kids' summer reading and stuff?
Just opened again.
It just opened.
It
but
just reopened.
do you mean to
Jake.
extend? Because didn't we extend it already?
Yeah, we already extended the deadline once.
Once, yeah.
I almost feel
I
like
say
we,
that we scan the pictures that we have and the essays that we have. We can scan them in. We can email them all to Lisa. She can email them to the group, and we can each send our decision on which should win for which category. And then whoever uses the same or the correct, or not the correct, the most amount of points then would.
Do we know what
Get their
category they're
respect.
in? Because it could very well be one in each category
Yeah,
already.
there could be one in each category, Jackie, age-wise, so,
Right.
yeah.
So maybe we look into that, and then if not, if there is a decision that has to be made, but if it's not, if it's one in each category, we just award, just get out and just be done with this.
Diane, you had a
These
comment?
kids did it. And that's important, they did it.
They did, and I want to acknowledge that too. That's
Could we not extend it a little more and figure out a way to contact the kids that are still kind of stuck at home?
I just think that these people did it in time. We've already extended it once. I think these kids need to be rewarded for doing it right away and getting their stuff in.
Yep.
I mean, it's unfortunate, and it just is what it is. But I think without schools being open and everyone's kind of scattered to the winds at home, and it's summer now, I just think we need to just award and be done, and then we'll start fresh with a new contest when the time comes.
I agree, because I think it'd be really
agree.
difficult to get them.
I'm sensing a consensus on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So-
I don't think we need a motion on that. Dan or Tim, you can tell me you think I do, because we're following the already established rules and just decide to award them as we have. Requires no change in policy. Okay? I'll
We
contact.
need a,
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Larry. I don't think we need a formal motion on that. We're not deviating from what we already agreed on, so we're good.
Yep.
So the education committee should.
We'll take care of that. The
Okay.
education committee will take care of that with Lisa and make sure that those awards get handed out. Okay, on to current human rights issues. If you want peace, work for justice, yard signs. Do we have a report on that? Jackie?
I think Wendy should talk about it.
I
It's
know
really
we,
hard to
we
write and
did
talk at
we
the same
did pay
time.
for 300
Wendy
signs.
is well spoken. Wendy is very well spoken.
Okay.
I am an emotional speaker, so for safety reasons, I think
Okay.
Wendy is very good at that. So
Okay.
I'm going
All
to
right.
defer.
Okay, you'll defer to Wendy. Wendy, you have a report for us?
So for the signs, we did order 300 if you want peace, work for justice yard signs, which we had assumed and talked about at our last meeting that this would be a unifying message that we could get and bring the community together. It is my opinion, and well, not really my opinion, but I've observed that we've almost had the opposite effect with the signs, that it's being divisive, that it's being, for whatever reason, viewed now as they're anti-police signs. I've had 3 returned to me.
Okay.
And I've had people that won't take them because, we really agree with the message, but we don't, but my neighbor is a police officer and I can't, so we have to, I don't know that I don't think that right at this point in time, we have achieved what we wanted to with those signs, but I don't think it's too late. I think we still can.
Okay.
And that leads me into what I had on for the addendum is maybe a possible solution to that or a way to work on that.
Okay.
We have given out 78 of them.
Yeah, we have. It's not been all a negative response, but there are people that want them that are now concerned that the message that they're sending, and I don't think that's the message we want to send.
No.
And we
I
need to
think
make sure
we
that
prob-
it's
have to
not.
prevent that in our letter, that it's a non-political message necessarily.
But
It's a human rights message.
It's been tied with what happened was with the protesting before it was, like, I hate to even say group, but it was before it was more organized than it was. There were individuals that had said some really negative things to a police officer in town.
Right.
The signs are associated with that.
Okay.
We are then associated with that, and it's like a splitting issue right now.
We should have made a comment while Commander Borker was here about
The signs.
the signs.
I was thinking that, but we can. Can I jump ahead to what we're talking about with the?
Sure, let's go ahead and
Okay.
do the addendum.
So on the addendum, what I was thinking about this, like, how can we? Because the last thing I think any of us want to do is make this worse, right? I mean, we need to be bringing the community together, and if we're doing the opposite of that, then what are we going to do to fix that, or to? There's I think hard feelings between. I think there's police officers that have hard feelings. I think there are people who are working towards the BLM, or even us that have. There's issues that need to be fixed. So I did. Had a conversation with Bukata Hayes, who is the director of the Mankato Area Diversity Council, because they have programs where they can come to towns, and they just recently did this in St. Peter, where they'll come and do, I don't know if an intervention is the right word for it, but like relationship building and commitment forming between community groups, like just citizens and our commission and the police officers. Yes. So they do this and they're trained for that, and they send people out to do this. And he said that they're willing and they're ready if we need them. Now, so getting back to the budget, so there's a cost for this, and there's all sorts of different ways that we could utilize them. An example that he gave to me was that he said maybe like 2 to 3 sessions, like maybe 2-hour sessions over the period of 3 to 6 months is what he might suggest, just to get these different groups of people in our town kind of listening and hearing each other and more on the same page, so we're not polarized. And if we did something like that, that would run somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 for them to come in and work with our community on that. Now, that's just one suggestion. There's other ways and there's other things they have to offer too, but that one was one that I thought I would just bring up as an example.
I really like that. I really do.
Are you guys online?
I like that idea.
I like
Dee
it too
and I
because
were
they're-
talking the other day that it might be a good idea to get a hold of all of the religious leaders in town and see what we can do to partner with them, that they have an opportunity of very open ears in their congregations for as long as they want to keep their sermons open. And, you know, they have an active, captive audience. And I think we could really make a difference here by reaching out to a non-standard group and ask for help. And we would need to reach out to every single denomination, or at least every single church in town here, to make sure everybody is represented. But I think that might be one of the best ways and most respected ways, especially in this community, and how important it is for people in their churches to actually make positive differences.
I think a lot of maybe some of the people that would need to come to some of these meetings just aren't flat out going to come to some of these meetings, but that would be a way to reach.
Right, and I think that's what we were talking about too, even just within these organizations, these religious organizations, that they even just inform their congregants that this is going on, even to let them know that these things are available in the
What does
community.
Pastor Diane think?
I love the idea, and it is a great way to get the message probably fastest out, because most people go to church in this town somewhere. So, and I've been doing that already, not necessarily specific this thing, but I've been talking about this for the last 3 or 4 weeks when all of this kind of broke out. And it's really interesting how the scripture readings that are set up for that day actually support what I want to say. So it's very cool. And I think that would be a great idea.
Do you meet with the pastors, or is there anything that you guys do together?
Well, there is a ministerium in town. I have not met with them recently for just personal reasons, but I meet with another group that's all UCC. But certainly, I think they'd be interested. I know many of the pastors, and I think they'd be interested in, trying to do something like this. Especially, well, I don't know if she's even here anymore now. But First Methodist is probably a good place to start. And the Oakwood might be interested, and the 2 Lutheran churches would definitely be interested. Christ the King and Our Saviors. When you get into the other Lutheran churches, I don't know how open that they would be for some of this, but I certainly would knock on the door.
And we have a Latter-day Saint as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that we had that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know 2 people that go to that church, so that's the only reason I know that they're available. And we also
Where is it?
have a Jewish.
You know where it is?
Yeah, it's by Cashwise. They're just out behind.
Oh, okay. I
That's
think maybe
running.
I have seen that. Yeah.
So
But-
are you
We
guys?
don't have a synagogue in town, do we? I mean,
I think that's, oh no, not a Jewish synagogue, I don't think so.
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we don't even have a synagogue in Mankato, I don't think. I wish we did, but
Okay, we're getting close to our time limit here. So,
Are we thinking? Can I ask? Are you thinking like when you talk about involving churches? Are you thinking like with the diversity council or is this something completely separate? I'm kind of.
I think it needs maybe a little
well,
bit.
the ministerium doesn't include all the pastors, so I definitely would consider contacting each church because you never know how someone, might go, wow, yeah, we really probably need to do that and hadn't thought of it. So the ministerium is mostly a community church. I go sometimes. And then the 2 Lutheran churches, and there's a couple other, a Redeemer, I think, is also involved in the ministerium, but I think the rest of the churches are not. So
if we did
I would just contact all the churches rather than just the ministerium because you'll miss pastors otherwise.
I do believe the Mankato Diversity Council tends to work with churches as part of the group.
Okay.
I think that's because that's part of the Welcoming Communities Project, and they often invite and include religious leaders in the community. And ironically, with the Welcoming Communities Project, what we've noticed is that there seems to be a lack of interest from some of the religious leaders in the 3 communities. That there aren't enough religious leaders involved in the Welcoming Communities Project. We need more, is what we're suggesting. How about we come up with a plan for our next meeting in July, since we probably won't have a meeting, a training session anytime soon. Wendy,
Well, and
Well,
is
here-
this something for like the education committee and the events committee to kind of work together,
Together.
separately, but together on
Yeah.
like to figure out how this will look?
Because here's my thought: if we wait, I think we need to. Not that we need another special meeting, but if we wait till our meeting in July, and then decide something, we're into August, and this is kind of an immediate. Like we should try and get on it. I think as soon as we can because this isn't. It's not getting any better
We should
right
try
now.
and get on it quickly, except there's always going to be something that we can pair with. This isn't
Right.
just
Yeah.
the last time we're going to have to worry about race issues or any sort of relationship between city departments. So we are going to have plenty of options or times that we can do this. So I don't think it's going to be, I think we need to do it quickly, but I don't think that we're going to lose our chance.
why
we
don't
have to
we,
wait a
can we
little
get a subcommittee? Because we can't work as a whole group because of the open meeting laws, but can we get a subcommittee together to come up with a plan for our next meeting, which is in July, and maybe we can already agree to, start penciling in some dates before that, but then we can officially pass it at our next meeting?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea simply because that saves us a little bit of time and then we actually have information at the next
Right.
meeting rather than trying to figure out what information we have.
Do I have any volunteers to serve on this subcommittee? Limit of 4.
I'll serve. I'll serve, but I gotta have someone else with me.
Who's saying?
I'll serve.
Wait.
I have
Okay.
Jackie.
You
I
saw
have
Dan's hand.
Ann, I have Diane, 3, and then Wendy,
Yes.
since you have the information.
Okay.
All right. We have 4.
Me.
Who else?
Dan.
And
Was I on
Dan.
there?
Diane, Jackie, Dan, Wendy.
So not Sue. I had Sue down.
Perfect. Awesome.
Change it to Dan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And
Thank
then
you.
so that I'm understanding this. So do you want us to?
Come up with a plan.
Come up with a plan involving the diversity council.
Yeah.
And then, so do we need to approve because that's going to cost us money, or is this going to be all approved at the next meeting? Do we? What do I do with the
Decide
diversity
that at our
council? now?
meeting.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
approve it at the next
Yeah.
meeting.
So right now, just talk to them and get more of a firm plan with them as well. Okay, got it. I just didn't want to, not doing something I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
Thanks for reaching out to them.
I'm going to move quickly because we're past our deadline here. Number 1 is the in our packet was the correspondence from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, which was focusing on getting your legislator to do something in the special session. But since the special session ended last Friday, and we're not able to get anything done, but I want to point out a couple of things to you. In that document, there is a list of some of the proposed changes made to the police commission that we were talking about with Chief Borchert. Take a look at that so you're familiar perhaps with the terminologies that are being tossed about. Second, we have any other legislative update or city council liaison?
Who is it?
I'm not sure who our last city council liaison was.
Was it Jackie? Sue.
Was it? I think it was Sue.
think it was
I don't know
Sue.
when her term was up. Perhaps we can appoint a new one in our July meeting then, for the next quarter.
So no legislative update?
No legislative update.
But
Go ahead,
I was
Dan.
just going to say there's not a legislative update, but most of us are probably aware that the U.S. Supreme Court has now made it illegal to for employers to fire employees on the basis of their sexual orientation, which was never part of Title VII prior to. So it was a well-written opinion, and obviously long overdue, and a welcome adjustment. Essentially, they just said there's no way to not prosecute on the basis of sex, which is already prohibited by Title VII if you discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So that did happen. It's not legislative, but it's a big deal.
And DACA too.
And
The
DACA.
DACA as well.
That was the other thing. Both of those were just so stunning to me because, I didn't really expect those things to get done, and so it was very exciting.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Other business, do we have any updates from the Welcoming Communities Project or New Ulm Forward? I think this was on the agenda because I think they were going to come and talk to us sometime in the future. That's why it's on the agenda, but with COVID, it's been just pushed back. And then finally, the last item on the agenda, which is what we might want to table for next time, but many of you received an email from someone which questioned the hiring practice of someone whose social media presence gave the impression that perhaps it wouldn't be a worthwhile choice by the city to engage in a business contract with. And so I did some follow-up on that, and I asked, what's the scope, what is our scope in regard to that? Because part of the scope of our charter is to advise the city on human rights issues. I had City Manager Dalton look around. I asked him if we have a vetting process for entering into contracts with local contractors, and he said no, they didn't. They have letters of reference and low bid rules, but they don't have a vetting process. And he was willing to look around to the League of Minnesota Cities to see if others have one, and he could not find any. The historian couldn't find any. But that might be something we might want to discuss, is should we discuss, or at least advise the city to discuss, a vetting process so that to protect the city from engaging in business relationships with maybe not positive for the community at large. Maybe we can table that to next time, if that's agreeable with everyone, because we are at our moment of adjournment.
I agree with that. I'm agreeable to that.
Okay, so we'll table the discussion of scope of Human Rights Commission for next time.
Yeah.
The date of our next meeting is July 27th of next month. Please notify Lisa about quorum, and I'm assuming we're going to be doing this similarly as we are today. We're getting better at it, I think, each time, which is good.
That's right.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I, Deanna Fensky, move to adjourn.
I, Chad Gens, second that
I,
motion.
Jackie Crable,
Too
second
late.
that.
Too late. Too late. Too late.
Okay. I think we can go with a voice vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
Sorry, I was just.
Go ahead, Dan.
Aye.
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 No, I was just going to rip on Tim a little bit.
Oh, okay.
He's not getting any better
I'm
after
eating dinner. I'm eating dinner.
Yeah, I can
Right.
tell.
Meeting
At
is
least
then
I'm not in
adjourned.
bed, right?
Meeting is then adjourned. We'll see you next month.
I'm very excited about this. I will.